Well, this morning we are going to talk about how to boost yoga student engagement and retention. And I have to say, when I started preparing some notes and an outline for today's discussion, I thought it would be simple, and it's turned out to be lengthy. So I'm going to do my best to keep it concise, but I will put together some transcript notes for you all so that you've got all the ideas and tools kind of all together. But yeah, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to talk about some ideas, some strategies, some tools that you might use. Um, and we'll also maybe take some time to think about like what kept you regular or returning to your yoga classes, because I think that there's great lessons for us all to learn from hearing individual people's stories about what kept them coming back to class. Because one of the rhythms that we often see as yoga teachers is kind of this rise and fall of students, which, could look like this. So, like 20 people join your class. By the end of the term, you have kind of 12 people who are still consistently coming. You do some more advertising and marketing and social media. And in the next term, those 12 people come back and maybe four new people join in. By the end of that next term, you now have 13 people who are still continuing to come, going on to the next block of classes. And again, you need to renew your advertising and marketing and social media efforts again. And this is a normal rhythm, but it requires a lot of marketing, a lot of advertising, energy, and energy is time, it's dollars, to keep drawing new students to your class. And of course, you also want to keep your existing students coming so that they maintain their practice. They get all the benefits out of yoga. Um, and this rhythm's definitely more prominent in like your first 2 years of business or teaching. But what we want to talk about is how can we kind of flatten those big waves and keep the students we already have coming to class so we're not always having to find
Yeah.
new students. Because new students aren't easy to get, right? So let's talk about how we can make meaningful connections with students and build a sense of community and foster loyalty so that we can do our best to ensure that students return to class regularly. So I've kind of outlined some key areas like building personal connections. So when we work to foster a really welcoming and inclusive environment, that helps our students to feel valued and to feel seen. So, like warmly greeting each student as they arrive, remembering their names and using their names, so they know that they're remembered, that they're being seen by their teacher. Checking in at the start of class about needs and preferences. And, while I say all that, I will say also be sure to get to know how much each student wants to personally engage. You want to respect student boundaries. But being warmly welcomed really matters. I don't know if you've ever been to a class where you kind of feel invisible. You come into class and the teacher doesn't welcome you, and the students are all doing their own thing, and you're kind of like, just get on your mat and do your practice and get up and leave. And that's not the kind of class that me personally, that I feel drawn to returning to, where I didn't make any connections. So thinking about how the think about how you can create that kind of community where the labor isn't all yours as the teacher, where
Mm.
the students also feel as though they're a part of the community that does some of the labor and feels some of the urge and responsibility to welcome new people into the fold, right?
Mm.
So that's
Mm.
maybe something that you can think about, is how can I create that? And if you're a really social person or you've had experience, leading groups before, you might already have strategies for that. For someone like me, I'm quite socially awkward. I have to like invent strategies to have chit chat and small talk that's not entirely focused on the work, because that's where my head often stays. Developing those strategies can really help you to create that kind of space. You genuinely care about your students, so find ways for them to feel that. As far as community building goes, you know, you want to create a sense of belonging, and you can do that in lots of ways, like the intros that we just talked about. You know, hosting informal gatherings, like having a cuppa after, inviting anyone along who wants to, or if it's available, having tea on site where people can kind of gather and have tea together. Even if you're coming and going and doing your admin stuff, there's still that kind of connection happening. You know, maybe having a potluck every once in a while. Um, Out of the physical space, creating online groups for students to connect and share tips, whether that's, you know, WhatsApp or Facebook. I really like ideas like recognizing achievements, whether that be group achievements, you know, this group's been practicing together for this amount of time, or, you know, for a student who's, you know, reached their 1 year anniversary of starting yoga. And it doesn't have to be a huge deal. That can be personal or it can be within the class, but just acknowledging people and acknowledging that their presence matters to the class. Um, and again, that's help foster connections among students. Outside of class, you can also be engaging with your students through like your blog or newsletters, through events, through social media. You know, you can invite your students to all go as a group to, you know, a local fun run or event where, you know, we're doing something, it's outside of yoga, but it's still our yoga group getting involved and maybe doing something good for charity. So those are all things that you can do for community building. And it doesn't have to always be your labor. You can find people within your yoga community who are eager to help out with that. Um, when it comes to these kinds of things, you do want to be careful about having student consent before sharing any personal information amongst students or images inside or outside the class. Like, you know, taking pictures for social media, everyone you take a picture of should have already given you prior consent, positive consent to have their picture taken and shared. So that's important to keep in mind when you get enthusiastic about this kind of community building. For some of us as teachers, we prefer to begin a class in silence so that people come into the space, they turn off their phones, they tuck their shoes away, and they have some quiet time or time for reflection or intention before class. And that's all super great. That doesn't mean you're not also doing some community building so that people do still have a chance to make community connections. And I know that Trish, our trainer in Gawler, she does awesome things. She has trivia nights, she organizes dinners, and her student community gets really involved in helping out with that. And I think that that's a great way to build and maintain community. So that's really nice. Another really important element for both student engagement and retention is to really pay attention to student needs. So like understanding and adapting to all the diverse skill levels and goals that are in your class. So not making assumptions that all the students have the same goals, not making assumptions that all the students have the same abilities or the same experience with yoga. So really paying attention to that. And obviously that means providing modifications and challenges to keep classes inclusive and engaging for each person that's in there, right? As well as collectively. And so that's going to include things like, you know, theming and sequencing and class offerings that really meet your students where they're at. And, you know, by regularly asking them, you can get a sense for that. And the last thing I'll say about that, and this is common, no matter what you planned in your imagination for your class, it's who's shown up that you teach, right? So how will you teach to these people that showed up? And that's something to remember. I feel as a student that I can feel it when I come into a class and the teachers worked on a plan outside of class and come in and not notice that we're not the class for that plan and has just gone ahead with it and it's just falling flat. It's just not working. So, you know, you've got to be adaptable to whoever shows up on the day. That's particularly challenging when you're teaching all levels drop-in classes, right? And so making sure that your plans are flexible so they're meeting the real people who are in front of you. So those are a few kind of broader things to kind of keep in mind. Yeah, so class management, it can be really tricky, especially if you have a really regular group. First of all, there can be the issues of when you're community building, where you've ended up having a really cliquey class who it can feel like high school again. And managing that becomes part of your responsibility, right?
Yeah.
But to the question of the moment, like when you've got students who've gotten to know each other so well and gotten really friendly and casual, and they're having a riotous time at the start of class, and you can't get them back. There's a couple strategies I use. You know, most of what I teach now is yoga teacher training, and getting people back is like a full-time job. So I have a couple strategies. Number one, I'll use a singing bowl and ding it a couple times, like stand at the top of the class, just eyes on the students. You've rung the bell, that's it. It might not work the first time, it might not work the second time, but eventually that kind of ritual is going to have an effect. Students are going to go, it's a bell, you know, back in school,
Yeah.
recess is over, time to go back to class. So that's one strategy. Another strategy is to talk openly about it. Like, I love seeing how happy you all are to greet each other, and I love how this community is built. Um, let's have a practice that when I sit on my mat, that's when it's time that class is going to begin. We're going to have a period of silence. This is how we're going to do this. This is the rule. Let's all contribute to doing this together. Um, and even without saying that, just your presence sitting on the mat at the top of the class, like quietly and looking, can sometimes be enough to bring students back. So definitely, you know, it's a great problem to have. It means that your
Mhm.
students are connecting,
Yeah.
right? And you don't want to be shaming people or calling people out or making people feel like they're acting inappropriately or they're not yogic enough or whatever. It's just like, okay, great, awesome. Now it's time for yoga. It can get what you don't want is to be yelling at, not at your students, but yelling to get your students to come back. Like, that's not the energy you want to start class with. At this point, I should point out that, like, not all of these ideas or strategies will work for you. Matter of picking and choosing what feels authentic for you, and, you know, experiment if you like, try different things out. And really importantly, be following the guidelines or the systems of spaces you teach in. So that might be different between the gym, the yoga studio. The gym might be like, no, people can't stay and chat after we've got a class. You've got to get out. There's nowhere for tea. Like, forget your idea, and, you know, you'll have to try something else. So just be aware of, like, the needs of other instructors and the needs of the space when you're coming up with your ideas. So that's something to think about. So let's talk about some specific tools and strategies. Like we've talked about before class, like, you know, greeting people warmly. You don't have to dig into someone's personal life or think up, this is my social anxiety again, think up something good to say. Like, just, hi, how's your day? Or, hi, it's great to see you, right? Really simple things. Those little bits of connection can really go a long way. Um, Thinking about setting the tone, right? So creating an environment that people feel really welcomed into, that feels like a special environment. And that might be with music, that might be with lighting, that might be with the way that you've designed or organized the space, having props and mats set out. You want to make it a space that people feel really good about coming into. I think it's a great idea, you know, in the before class strategies, to give students some time, either one-on-one or collectively as a group, to speak up if they want to about what needs they might have for that day, what, you know, preferences, what their goals are, what their intentions are for the class. So again, you can do that one-on-one. You can do that as a group. You know, does anyone have an intention they want to share or a preference for today's class, any special requests, or you can offer students the opportunity to sit with their intentions for the class, and you might offer them some suggestions for that. But give them that space so that there's a sense of specialness and there's a sense of ritual when you walk into class. Like, I've gone from a busy day into this like special cozy space, and now we're moving into the practice of yoga. You know, the language that you use, the way you're holding space, all of that really helps people step through that doorway into a place that feels more special to them than maybe other places. And giving students an opportunity before class to share with you, like, why they're there, you know, what they're looking forward to doing in class. You know, maybe they'll talk about, oh, today my knee hurts, and great, let me get you some props. All of that sets people up for success in their practice, and reminds students that they matter as a group and that each one of them matters. Now, while I say all that, please remember, not everybody wants to speak up in class or be pointed out. So if you have a class of 10 people and 9 told you their intention out loud and one's just quietly in the corner, you don't have to make them say it out loud. They can just hold it in their quiet, shy hearts. Okay. Strategies I might recommend exploring. One of them is keeping a notebook or something to jot down just little tidbits about your regular students. You know, Sally loves crow pose. You know, Jeremy needs a prop or an alternative for kneeling poses, so you can remember that. You know, Sarah needs a fan. She gets overheated. She needs to be near wherever the ventilation is, right? Just like knowing these things about your students and remembering them, or having a little note to remind you of them, helps them know that they matter and that their needs have been noted and that you're there to support those needs, right? So if I've got a student with knee issues and they come into class, it's great to see you. Let me grab a prop, something softer for you to kneel on in today's practice. You know, I saved your spot near the fan so that you can keep cool in today's practice. Those things really matter. They matter not just as a teacher and not just as a business owner, but on a human level, to be seen and to have your needs understood and then anticipated, that really matters. Another little strategy I'll recommend is like, sometimes when a group is new and they kind of don't know each other, you could take moments to do little sort of icebreaker questions. I know in the corporate world, people seem to really hate this, but sometimes it's nice to just like, what's your favorite part of yoga class? Anyone? You know, what's your favorite way to relax? Or yeah, what's your favorite dessert? Whatever, right? Not everyone has to answer, but it gives people an opportunity to contribute back in class so that it's not all teacher talking to students, that students feel that they can contribute as well. And that matters. We're going to try the icebreaker idea. And the icebreaker idea is just Heather's weird social awkwardness I need strategy, right? If you're going to try the icebreaker idea, no open-ended questions, because you will have some students who will spend 15 minutes telling you a story, and you can't, then that becomes stealing from all the other students who just want to do yoga, right? So you do want to be really careful, something really simple and quick. And like, oh, great, you love horses? Awesome. What's your favorite animal? Like, it does require a little bit of management sometimes. Some of you might have even better ideas about how to get people to connect, and that's really nice. I'm still training in that area. So that's all sort of before class stuff. The during class stuff is like, again, using people's names and using them in the positive, providing a variety of options for students so that they know that you're seeing them and you're seeing that their experience in the practice, and that you're there to offer them something that might be more comfortable, more challenging, right? Give them opportunities to express themselves, give them opportunities for creativity, be responsive to their needs. So look at their body language, the expression on their faces, the way they're breathing, so that you know to modify the practice to match your students' energy. And again, I'll say, you might have had a great plan for your class. It might be the best yoga design you've ever come up with, and you come to class with this, brilliant dynamic sequence, and all your students are just dragging themselves into class. Respond to where your students are at. That's really important. Your students will walk away from a class that didn't respond to the general needs, feeling like it wasn't a class for them. And that's not a great feeling. That's not something that's going to draw them back to class. When you have those all levels drop-in classes, that can be a real challenge. So a couple of strategies that you can employ are things like, offering different variations, right? And offering them in a way where it's not like, if you're a beginner, try this, or if you're not flexible, try this. It's more like, if you feel steadier today, you could try this. If you're looking for more challenge today, you could try this. If you're looking for more grounding today, you could try this. So we're stripping away any ideas about ability, or like that there's a hierarchy of poses. You can do the full pose or like this modified pose. We're taking all of that away and just talking about what kind of experience you want to have today, or like, if you're feeling this way, you might try this option, right? And another strategy is to incorporate student feedback into your class. So if your students say to you, oh, I really loved that reclining sequence that you did last week, great. Like, employ that for a couple of weeks, right? Give them the things they said they liked. The old days where we said the pose that you like the least is the one you need the most, you can retire that. That's old timey thinking. If your students love something, give it to them, right? Do that. And fill in gaps on the sides of that technique so that they get more of that experience. If they loved doing a back bend, great. Do some back bending preps and interesting back bends for a couple of weeks. Give them the experiences that they're looking for, and that's important. I think that's a great question. It's the challenge in those all levels drop-in classes is you might have students who've been coming for years and are working on stronger poses or more trickier poses, and then you've got beginners who've never done yoga before. And you don't want to steal from either of those groups by making a handstand focused class that the beginners are like overwhelmed by, but never letting those experienced students work on their handstand practice. One of the strategies that you can employ is making sure that each pose that you're offering, there's lots of bus stops. So today we're going to be working a little bit on arm balancing. And if you're already working on your handstands, you might move over to the wall. You can start prepping for that. If you're new to the practice or you want to do some preparatory work for handstands, here's some things that we're going to do, right? And then give people preparatory movements, give them like half handstands on the wall, and then, let people go off with that prep work, and then you can help the people who are doing full handstands if they need that help. So what that means is that for every advanced technique that you want to offer, you need to have a full catalog of preparatory movements and regressed movements that you can put on offer. So for example, let's talk about upward bow, right? Generally the way that I teach, that's the full back bend. Generally the way that I teach upward bow in an all levels drop-in class is that everyone starts with bridge pose so that everyone's gotten some instruction about coming into bridge pose. Bridge is a pretty good preparatory movement for upward bow on its own, but now people have done a thing. And so now we're going to do a second round of bridge. If bridge feels like the place for you to be working today, do another round of bridge. You know how to do it. If you want it to be even more grounded, you can tuck a brick under your seat. For those of you wanting to move on to upward bow, follow my cues, and then I can talk people through that. So now I've got people working on two different things in the class, but everybody's safe because everyone started with the first bus stop. And now people can choose to come with me to the second. Now you're free to go and do that, do the ankle lift, or put people against a wall and palms on the wall or hands on bricks, or whatever the options are you're going to offer for people working their way up there. And even the people who are already actively working on their upward bow, they can benefit from doing like dinner plate hands and warming up their wrists, warming up their shoulders. Like all that prep stuff is good for everybody. And what this does is it ensures that your students aren't coming to class going, oh yeah, I went to yoga, but there was this big chunk of time where I was sitting around watching other people do back bends or watching other people do handstands, right? That everyone's needs were met and no one felt like they weren't doing a full practice. Yeah. So it's a really, really good question and really good thing to keep an eye on when you've got those tricky all levels drop-in classes, right? They're tough. And at any point, if you're wondering how it's going, ask your students. Ask them as a group or ask them individually. Today was your first class. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you have any questions for me? How was the flow of class for you? I know you see that some people have been practicing for a long time. They're doing fancy stuff. I'm really glad that you're here to build a strong foundation. But that's after class stuff. So let's talk about after class stuff. Follow up with students, ask them how they felt about class, ask them if they have any preferences or they've got something that they definitely want to work on next time. Like, oh, this time we did, half moon. I really liked that. I'd love to do more things that challenge my balance. Great. You can take that on board, pop it into your sequence. Taking requests. And that could be something that you do one-on-one. It can be something you kind of do with the class, like any requests for next week. Or it can be something that you do using like anonymous surveys. People will feel more comfortable telling you things not to your face, like class stank, right? No one's going to say that, but people might really want to give you feedback that would be helpful, but they don't want to say it to you, or they don't want to say it in class, or they can never catch your eye, I think that it's post class, it's great to encourage students to take their practice home in some way, whether that's giving people yama and niyama cards or giving them a couple of techniques they can take home, spinal warm-ups or something, maybe talking about, when they track all their other exercise, maybe they want to track their yoga or their meditation or something. Anything that's going to motivate their continued practice outside the studio, whether that be practice on or off the mat. So encouraging that people have yoga in their lives, whether they come to your class or not. So that's something to think about. One of the strategies I really like is having a post-class ritual. So similar to an opening class ritual where you ring the bell and students know it's time to quiet down and come onto their mats, it helps over time. That works on our nervous system and our chemistry, and we start to settle down and we go, here I am in yoga, right? The same thing with a post-class ritual, creating a moment to connect, creating a moment to seal in the practice, to remind ourselves we just did something special together. And so you might ohm out or use some other chant or, a motto. I really like using thank you, strong body in classes where I'm not using Sanskrit or I'm not using chanting. So that's often in the gym or in corporate classes where it's more appropriate to kind of stay away from those things. So you say something out loud or silently that you're grateful for or your favorite part of today's practice. But my favorite is thank you, strong body. So I'll say to students, let's say thank you to our strong bodies and join with me. Thank you, strong body. And that's a way to kind of create a ritual of this is the end of class. And it's such a positive thing to remember why we came to class and that it feels really good and it's something that our bodies give to us, but it's also something we give back to our bodies. It doesn't have to be thank you, strong body. That's just something I like. But anything that helps you kind of unite the class one more time and seal in the practice. And another strategy that you could use is just little encouraging messages. If you have a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group or a text group, or you're using some kind of class management system where you can send people quick little messages, just, to follow up with them, or like, we missed you in last class, I hope you're well, or hope to see you soon. Making connections with students is really important, and letting them know that they're seen and that they're missed if they're not coming to class. Ongoing engagement. I don't love 30-day challenges personally, but what does my personal opinion have to do with anything? 30-day challenges are something that gets people really excited and really engaged, and people love them. So do 30-day yoga challenges or meditation challenges or whatever. Or you can do challenges like a weekly challenge. This week we're focusing on balance, the strength, mindfulness, whatever, right? um, Offering people that this week or this month is about this special thing, and let's focus on that together, right? I think it's great to celebrate people's achievements, so acknowledging people's milestones. If a student's, you know, been to their 10th class or 100th class, or they've gotten their first crow pose or handstand, like, that's something to celebrate with students. And as a teacher, especially in those poses, you'll see your students, when they achieve those things, the first thing they'll do is look at you. Did you see me? Did you see me do it? And I love that I get to be the person who's there going, I saw you. I saw you do that. Well done. You can even more vocally, if the student's open to it, celebrate that student's accomplishment. And the third thing is, stay connected with your students. Social media, if you're a social media person, if you're not, send them a regular email, have a dedicated group chat, share tips, share events, share inspirations, share news, just to keep people connected, right? It doesn't have to be anything really complicated. Um, as far as strategies go, for ongoing engagement, one of the things that really engages people is to offer little extras, little extra workshops. They don't have to be huge. They can just be short, specific sessions, like yoga for better sleep, get on up handstand workshops. They can be 1 hour that are set aside specific time just to work on something special. And you can gather ideas for that. You don't have to even use your own brain, and you can schedule extra time for them for that. That's a really great thing to keep people engaged and give them that little bit more of yoga. A lot of what your students are looking for is, they love their class where they come in and lie down and do a practice and relax and they're so sleepy, and then they leave, but they want to learn a little something more about yoga. So you could do a little short philosophy talk. You could do a chanting session if you like to. Like, there's lots of, it doesn't have to be huge, just little things, a 30-minute add-on to a class once a month, that just gives people that little something extra, right? So that's something that can really help with people's engagement and their growth and their, continued practice. Goal oriented programs, like structured programs, like, strength and flexibility series for regulars, or, foundations of yoga series. You could do a series, like, especially if you teach in blocks, a 10-week series of yoga and ethics, or yoga and philosophy, where you do a little bit, 10 minutes, you learn about one of the yamas or niyamas, and then you do a practice where you sprinkle in a little bit of wisdom, and then at the end you do a little meditation around one of the yamas or niyamas, and you do that for 10 weeks. Your students will love that. They get a little bit of practice, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of meditation. Now they've learned a little more about yoga. So there's something that you can run with. These extras really can matter to your students, right? So that's something to remember. What we learn about community building and about student engagement, and is, we learn from seeing how other teachers do it. And some teachers do something so well, we want to model that, right? We're like, that really works. I learned something from that. I'm going to bring that to my own teaching. Sometimes we learn from seeing, like, that is rude, or that people don't respond well to that, or that's not authentic for me. And we know what we're not going to do in our classes. So like the more you're going out to different spaces and different teachers, the more you're able to gather ideas and bring them back to your own teaching. So that's something to think about. I've got some tools that I want to tell you about that you can use for some of these things that we've talked about. There's attendance tracking app, so you can keep track of your students' attendance and trends, what classes are working, what aren't, what students are coming, who isn't. If you're running or working in or running a big studio, things like Mindbody or ClassPass are so helpful for that. They're so expensive. So if you're a smaller business or you're a solo yoga teacher, you can use free tools like Google Sheets and track attendance manually. Um, it is worth the time that you put in to keeping track in order to gather that information and have a kind of bigger picture of what's going on in your classes. If you're looking at online connections for your students, WhatsApp groups are very popular and kind of serve all ages. So they're kind of like meet everyone. Facebook groups are terrific, but they tend to not really attract the younger folks who don't have Facebook accounts. So Facebook's great if your student community are Facebook users, but it tends to be less helpful if you're working with younger people. And that just, again, those create online communities for people to share experiences, to ask questions, and for you to keep students updated, right? So that's really helpful. For bigger communications like your monthly schedule, maybe you're sending people a recipe or some yoga tips or something. The free tier of MailChimp is anything under 2,000 people. So that if you're just starting your yoga business, it should take you, you should be able to use that for a while. There's also Constant Contact, which has a free tier. This allows you to send out newsletters, keep students updated about classes or themes or yoga tips, whatever. Invite people to contribute ideas to the classes. You do need to be gathering people's email addresses in order to do that. So that's something to, that's a little job for you to do, but it's well worth it to be able to have that communication. I talked before about anonymous surveys, and SurveyMonkey, you can make free surveys and send them out to students. People bribe your students with something to get them to do it. You could be entered into a draw to win this free eye pillow or something, because people are busy, right? And you don't want to overwhelm them with questions, but a SurveyMonkey every 3 months, 6 months gives you a chance to find out, are the class times working? Is the length of the class working? Are the themes and sequences working? Do people want any new classes? Do they want to do your handstand workshop, right? Do they want guest teachers to come in and teach some fancy things? All of that intel you can be gathering from SurveyMonkey. Okay, so that's a really useful tool. If you're not using tools like that, or you have students who don't use tools like that, you can have a suggestion box. There's nothing wrong with that. You could have a community board where you've got your question of the month that you're asking for people's input on, and your tip of the month and whatever. Like, don't forget about having physical things as well. Gives people a place to kind of get informed. And obviously Canva, there's a free tier on Canva that you can be using to design your class schedules and giving people little milestone certificates. Today's your 1-year anniversary of starting yoga, and event posters, all the things that you want to do. Social media, you can be using your social media to get people to connect by inviting participation. What's your favorite pose? What's your favorite prop? What's your favorite type of class in the winter? Whatever it is, right? All you're looking for is for people to be able to talk back to you and give you input and play a role in how your classes are created, right? So all of those tools are really useful. what do you do with all that intel? Now you can do like personalized class themes based on their input. You know, if they're all talking about their stress levels, restorative yoga for stress, right? If they're all talking about, oh, that was cool what we did with the bricks last week, great. Add more props, do prop it up classes, right? Like follow where their interests are. If your students, if you see that they're really interested in challenges, you can offer themes to build up to fancier poses, like those workshops I was talking about in the Ashtanga community. You could do a little let's fly with crow pose theme, you know, for 1 week, for a couple of weeks, um, building up to bow pose. As long as you're offering lots of accessible options, you're scaffolding their learning, offering them lots of, you know, preparatory movements on their way there. These are great to add to your regular yoga audience as well as specialty workshops. So this is something you can blend into your everyday classes as well. You know, 5 minutes to work on this little thing, and everyone's got a version of the pose or a preparatory movement that they can be working on. So that's something to think about, and that's intel that you've gathered through talking to students, asking out loud, or like doing your surveys or having an old-timey suggestion box. You can also use tools like consent cards, Yama and Niyama cards, Ames cards. These are all in your training portal, or they're in the shop. You can download them for free. These tools give students a voice in the class, a way to communicate with you. It helps them refine their intentions. Sometimes we forget why we're going to yoga. Have you ever had that experience? And using Ames cards or Yama and Niyama cards can help remind us, like, yeah, I'm here for strength. I'm here to relax. I'm here for, right? And they also give you a chance to just a little bit of educating, like with the Yama and Niyama cards. You know, they pull a card. Today they learn about ahimsa, non-harming. So those are really great tools to be using sort of within your classes. You could also use, like, if you have yoga pose cards, I don't know if you've ever seen them, you could use those and have, you know, a student pick a card, and then that's a pose that we're going to be working on today, right? All these things help your students to really engage in the process of the class, not just be another number on a mat, right? That they're invested and involved, and their contributions matter. And I think that's really important. The thing is, ensure that you make yourself available to students after class. It doesn't have to be a super long amount of time. And if you've got long talkers, you be really clear on, I've got 5 minutes after class if anyone's got any questions, and make sure that 5 minutes is equally sprinkled amongst people. But like, make it a practice to stay, answer questions, connect with students, particularly those students who don't like to speak up in class. They'll use that one-on-one time to make a connection. And so it's really useful if you can give them that time. I know not everyone's schedule allows for that, but, you know, do your best. Oh, we're going over time. Okay, last thing. This is really important. The last thing I want to say is you can do everything right and still have big waves of signups and dropouts. Like, not everything's about you, Heather. People get busy, they get sick, they're moving house, there's a pandemic. Lots can happen that has nothing to do with how well you teach or how well you create community. Staying consistent with your practices and with your offerings, it can be really important, so that people, when they're ready to return to yoga, your lovely self is what they think of first. Okay. And I hope that somewhere in there there's things that are helpful for you. I will have transcripts up for you on the blog, so that if you're wanting to reference back any of those tools or any of the strategies, that will be there. For now, I want to say thank you so much for being here. Hello to those of you who are following along the recording, and I'll see y'all next week.